You mentioned that you were disappointed at the recordings of Tournemire playing Franck. Are there others who recorded Franck's music that you do agree with the interpretation?
I must say that I was very much impressed by the interpretations of orchestral pieces by Gabriel Pierné, which we can hear, fortunately, on recordings now, on CD. And it's just wonderful.
These are performances that Pierné is actually conducting.
Yes, yes. Pierné became the conductor of the orchestra Cologne, I think. You know, he made a great career as a conductor.
So his interpretation of the music of Franck was free of all the excessive rubato and liberties that Tournemire took with the music.
You know, of course, it's a great problem with the interpretation of César Franck. We have these three elements: the rubato, the touch, the art of the touch, and the registrations. Of course, we must try with the registrations to get as near as the ideal, the sound ideal of César Franck, and we must try to know the best possible the organ which Franck played at Saint-Clotilde. And then there is the touch. I cannot believe that César Franck has changed his way of playing when he heard, he probably was in his 40s, he heard Lemens play. He probably was impressed of the playing of Lemens, but I cannot imagine that he changed totally his way of playing. So I think there are great differences in the legato that was the way of playing of César Franck and the absolute legato of Lemens, of Widor, and of Dupré. Even Dupré was even more severe about the legato and all the rules. We know that Widor was not so strict. There is this, and then there is a rubato. We know that Franck played with great freedom. But of course we have to think the rubato is different for every composer, for every musician. We should not use the same rubato as for Liszt, Chopin. All these people played rubato, but César Franck was different. He was different. He was quite a religious person. We see that in his works there are many spiritual passages. He did want to express the difficulty of men between earth and the heaven and so on, and we can feel all this, and we can feel this dramatic situation often in his work. And so the rubato has to express this, but it has not to become a virtuosic rubato. You know, the Lefebvre played also rubato, but it was very different. You know, then we have to think very much on how far we should go. You know, and of course there are limits, and we should not go over these limits.
Right. Widor was a great influence on the young Marcel Dupré, who was one of your predecessors here at this magnificent organ. Would you like to speak about Dupré coming to Paris and to the organ class of Widor and his beginnings?
You know, Dupré at his beginning studied more with Guillemot, yes, and we know that he had some lessons with Widor, but there are some differences between the two organists. There are some differences. And, of course, we have here the layman's tradition and all these organists who are coming from a layman's tradition. You remember, you mentioned before the Bach tradition and all the students of Bach and the students of students of students. You know. In general, in such a tradition, everybody is putting something to the tradition. You know. And so it's the same thing with the layman's tradition. There were some rules, you know, the precise rules in this layman's school, and some people, the students of the students did sometimes add more or less to this. And then we know there are some great differences between the playing of Widor and Dupré. Dupré he's thinking of the music. He liked to sing the music in the general line, the architecture, not so much the detail. And on the contrary, Widor was still an artist trying to get every detail, you know, for the listener. You know. And we know, for instance, that Widor liked to do a little rallentando in a fugue before the entrance of the scene. But things like this, Dupré just hated things like this. Dupré hated the rubato, you know. He didn't like at all the rubato.
Therefore, in his Franck editions, he took that opportunity to put his stamp on the music of Franck and the interpretation of Franck's music.
Yes, I don't think that he was really in the mood of the world of César Franck. He came from this other school, you know, layman's tradition, you know, layman's. Also, the world of Saint-Sulpice, you know, was very different. You know, in a generation you have very different musicians. You know, some like to go between the notes, you know, like someone reading a text and trying to find between the words what happens in the text, you know. And others don't like this, you know. It's a great difference, you know. Ravel, he asked to his interprets to play the notes. Don't do something with my notes, you know. And so I think an interpret has really to follow, to try to serve the composer, you know. If the composer wants that he plays the notes, that is the best way, and then the music will sound true, you know. If you put a lot of rubato when you play a piece by Dupré, it sounds wrong. It sounds wrong. And on the contrary, if you play Franck in a very strict way, it just sounds wrong.